Hey guys, it's Kate, your plastic-free mermaid. Today I am going to be sharing with you the interview that I took with an anonymous operations manager from a recycling center. I just think it's important to get to know this issue as we face this global waste crisis and we start to see all of this trash piling up all over the world. That it's just important to reach out to the experts in this field and get more information. She didn't want us to reveal her identity or the company that she works for, which is totally understandable and fine. I didn't record our interview, but I took notes and recorded her answers. So I'll just go through it for you guys here. So much information here, so interesting. So I'm going to download this video and pop it on YouTube afterwards. All right, so we spoke with a lady, a mermaid lady. She's like vegan, such a legend. She's been in the recycling industry for 14 years. She started at a materials recovery facility, affectionately known as MRF, M-R-F. So note the language here, materials instead of waste or trash or rubbish. Super important to start. We really need to just retrain our brains in how we even talk about any of this stuff. It can't be trash, it can't be waste, we can't throw it away. That doesn't exist anymore. They need to be resources, materials, things that we are recovering, we can use again, closing the loop on the cycle of these products and these materials, instead of just abandoning them and going through them as single-use items. She has been the operations manager for this particular recycling center for 4 years. Here goes my question. So I first asked her questions about her, the plant, the recycling center that she works at, and then I asked questions about recycling in general and the global waste crisis, and then I asked her to send a message out to manufacturers, to the government, to consumers, and those participating in recycling. So that's kind of what's up for you as you watch this. Again, this is live, so you can tune in at any point if you need to leave. Okay, so who are your customers? 98% are commercial. So there's some stuff, so that's businesses like supermarkets and corporations that send all of their recyclables, their materials, to this recycling center, meaning about 2% comes from regional, from their residential areas. Most residential areas have their own materials recovery facility, or MRF. So your neighborhood, your town, wherever you live, the collection company then would take your recyclables to a materials recovery facility to be sorted, baled, so smashed into bales, and then sold on the global waste market. They are taking material that's already been sorted, and the remote regional waste that they get is very small. But I was interested. I was wondering how that comes about. How do you, thinking about Exmouth or a small community, remote area in a remote region, how do you get your waste to their recycling center? And it's up to the Shire, so it's in the hands of the local government. The Shire would manage this cost, so it's up to the council to manage the collection of waste and recyclable materials, and then they charge rates of their citizens, the people that live in their region. They charge rates which cover the cost of collecting the materials and transporting them to a recycling center or a materials recovery facility. The best thing to do for remote regions that don't yet have recycling is to first install a baler. So that's a small baler that, instead of just like filling up trucks with tons of stuff, it compacts the cans or the tins or the cardboard or the plastics. It compacts them into bales, and then they can transport them in companies, because those charge by pallet space or stocked bales. So that's just like getting, just maximizing space efficiency in delivery trucks. So what resources do you accept? So they have 2 sites, but at this site they mostly accept cardboard, newspaper, white office paper, some magazines and pamphlets, and then a couple different grades of plastic. So clear, LDPE. So that's like cling wrap. Colored cling wrap gets downgraded. So the more print and color plastic has on it, the less valuable it is, the less desirable it is, and the less easy it is to be recycled, it's downcycled. Also, she mentioned plastic bags, but she kind of rolled her eyes because that's just a can of worms, because plastic bags are actually made out of so many different types of plastics, and they have different colors and print all over it, so you can't just accept plastic bags as one type of plastic. It's many different kinds of resins go into those plastic bags. And then mostly what we saw there when we toured the plant is big industrial plastic wrap, such as the wrap around pallets, like big deliveries and that sort of stuff. They also accept PET, so like plastic bottles. They accept with the lids. The lids do contaminate because those are two different kinds of plastics. So if you're trying to recycle the plastics, remove the lids and rinse them out. They still accept plastic bottles with lids, but it just makes it a little trickier. All right, and then also HDPE, so like milk bottles and juice bottles, so they accept those in small volumes. And then polypropylene bulk bags, so those are those big woven bags that like you see maybe huge bags of rice. They're used in transporting grains. And she basically is just like, all these plastics keep growing, piling up, but no one's accepting or buying them. So they just have these like stockpiled out. They've had to turn off one of their sorting machines just to use that space to store the plastics, which they can't sell at the moment. Continuing on. How much contamination comes in? So much. In fact, there's never a batch that they get sent that is not contaminated. Let that sink in. All of the recyclable material that gets sent to recycling centers is always contaminated. So what material comes in most contaminated? So food waste is the worst. Food waste in plastics is, definitely an issue. The reason, if you think about it, usually to get rid of food waste off of metal or tin, they would just melt it down because they have different melting points. And then what's left after you get rid of the food waste is the raw material. Plastic has a really low melting point, so if you try to melt the food waste off, it will melt in plastic as well. Washing doesn't really work. You'd have to scrub. Imagine, you having to wash it at home is a pain in the ass. That's why most people don't wash their containers. They just throw them out. But we should, if we want them to actually be recycled. Mostly contamination is just the wrong types of plastic. It's just really hard to know what kind of plastics are recyclable. And they just, even in the commercial recycling, they're sending all their plastics together, and just the employees of the business or whatever, just don't know what kind of plastics to put in, and they put the wrong types in. And it's even hard for the people at the recycling center to determine what kind of plastics these are. So it's just really complicated. All different kinds of plastics, and they all look very similar if they're clear and hard or flexible. So it's tricky. The sources of their LDPE come from industrial pallet wrapping, supermarkets with big bales of plastics. Supermarkets are really bad about contamination because they chuck in all these colored materials, or they put in plastic trays, the food trays. So that's tough. We need to put responsibility on the supermarkets to be stricter on their employees, have more education. We need to educate businesses so that they can pass that down. Management can pass that education down to employees. And then what about residential recycling? Is that also contaminated? And she just laughed. Residential recycling contamination is through the roof. When she looks at residential recycling, she cries. Like, it's that bad. It's not as bad in commercial. So the sorts of recycling and materials that they get shipped to them or brought to them isn't as bad. But at the commercial recycling, residential recycling, if you think about your recycling bin, if I think about the recycling bins of my housemates and people I stay with, it's just a mess. People have no idea what to actually put in that bin, so they guess instead of looking it up and finding out. It's just unacceptable. The other kind of contamination they get in their commercial recycling is medical waste, which is, again, unacceptable. They have, this is another question, but they can take a small percentage of plastic contamination in their cardboard acceptance rates, but they can't. They zero zero acceptance policy for any food waste or any medical waste contamination. So do not put food waste in your recycling bin ever. What percentage actually gets recycled versus what percentage has to get sent to landfill because of contamination. It's hard to say what gets recycled. It's always changing based on who's buying it. Based on, this isn't a really stable industry at the moment, especially it's fluctuating based on who will buy the resources or the materials. But they had a huge bales of cardboard just sitting there waiting to be bought, and it's up to the contamination if it can be sold or not. What percentage gets sent to landfill because of contamination? Their recycling center is very responsible. They've put a lot of their companies that they work with have to be responsible as well. So they passed that responsibility on. So they have a lower contamination rate. So she said about less than 5% end up in landfill, but that's just for their plant, and she's a weapon. Like, she's looking after that, She refuses to send stuff to the landfill. They will stockpile it where they can until they find a buyer, but she's like praying they don't have one yet, so it's scary. Is recycling an accurate term, or is it better to think of as downcycling? Recycling is not an accurate term. People don't want to face that fact. We all feel good about the word recycling, but that is greenwashing at its core, like maybe where greenwashing was even invented, because most materials that get recycled are not being remade into something of equal value. They're being made into something of lesser value. They are being downcycled. So it's no longer the strong, sturdy, original grade of product. It's a lesser grade of product. So downcycling is the word that we should be using from now on instead of recycling. So if you can, try to work that into your vocabulary when we're talking about these things. Again, instead of waste and trash, materials and resources. Instead of recycling, downcycling. Like, let's face this issue head on about what we're actually doing, and owning the fact that it's not being recycled, it's being downcycled. So that we don't rely on this as like the ultimate solution. It's not. Using less is the ultimate solution. Different packaging. All right, so what else? Is it easier to work with residential or commercial waste? Commercial. Despite there being a lot of contamination, residential waste is hopelessly contaminated, like I've already said. Even environmental people don't care enough to sort it properly. People hear one thing about recycling, on one side of the country, on one side of the world, and they think it applies to their specific region, when in fact it's all so different. Your town is different to your city is different to your state. Your state, does not have the same materials that are collected in order to be sold on the waste market. It depends on your local materials recovery facility, what they're taking, what they're baling, and who they're selling it to. So it's like very specific to where you are in that moment, where you live, and where it's going. You have to look into it if you want to get it right. Otherwise, you can't use it because it'll just end up in landfill and won't be recycled, downcycled. How do people find out what is recyclable, downcyclable? Google it. You have to look it up. You can write, in the Google search your town and the recycling center and give them a call so you know what you can be putting in your bins, and the best way to work with your recycling center. If you should leave the lids on. Should you rinse out your plastics? Do you need to go that far? Well, does it even matter? So ask those questions. Why are there not more comprehensive advertising or information campaigns to help people, us, work with you or their local facilities? So these facilities are private. They are, like I said, regionally based and independently owned. So they work with their specific clients, whether that's a council who's bringing them trash or recyclables, or commercial industries, businesses like supermarkets. So they communicate with their clients, you need to bring us less contamination or we're going to charge you. And if they communicate that to the council, it's up to the council to decide if they want to put funding into that, if they care enough to educate their local community. There are some councils that go around and, do random checks of bins to give you kind of a report card on how you're recycling, how you're doing. But it's so rare. And there are too many middlemen, councils or collection companies that are the actual, doing the collection of the waste, who the council hires to then distribute it to the recycling centers and the different plants at that. So it's just complicated, and there's not enough funding for each small area of the country to get their own communications campaign. And plus, another thing, a lot of people in this industry are not super savvy with communications, so whilst they may have an education officer or marketing team, they're probably more dedicated to trying to find more clients than trying to educate the individuals on how to properly use the system. So again, responsibility has to go back on us. All right, general recycling questions. Okay, so what's happening with plastics? What's happening with the plastics you guys accept? No one wants plastics. No one will buy it right now. They can't even give away plastics for free. So they can't even just clear space in their recycling yard to just get rid of it. They can't just put it anywhere. They can't send it anywhere. So it's just sitting and stockpiling around the country, around the world. It's just piling up. Here at her recycling center, she refuses to send it to landfill. So she's got 250 tons of LDPE, 9 to 10 shipping containers full of LDPE with nowhere to go. And she's just nah, I will not send this to landfill. She's just waiting, praying for a buyer, for somewhere to ship this stuff. What does LDPE get recycled into? So that's that real thin, soft plastic. It can be washed, it gets sorted, it gets melted into pellets, little resin pellets like mermaid tears or nurdles, and it's sold to manufacturers to be melted into molds for different things. So it can be downcycled, but no one wants to buy it right now. So that's really tricky for recycling centers who have set up programs around collecting plastics, and now their buyers are gone. And like I said, there are so many middlemen in between us, the people with the plastics, using the plastics, creating this trash or these recyclables that we put into a recycling bin, hoping that it's going to make its way all the way to be recycled. But if these people aren't buying, these people have nowhere to put it, but we don't know that. We're not connected enough to this whole process to be aware or let that sink in or affect us or impact us or change our behavior. All right. Last year, China stopped accepting most of our recyclables. Do you know why? So there's a couple theories, some environmental, some economic. China is actually desperate for these materials. They manufacture so much, so many plastic products, so many paper products. So they really do want these materials. However, they stopped accepting foreign materials to drive up their own market internally. So to increase recycling in China and the values of materials in China. So now they have to spend more internally for these materials. Additionally, they were getting a lot of heat for the environmental problems associated with their recycling or the waste collection. So they're literally buying all the recycling, all the materials from all over the world and just piling it, and the work conditions were disgusting and so dangerous for workers, and the leakage and the runoff was really, really destructive. And there was a few great documentaries that kind of exposed this, and so they have had to clean up their act, which means closing their doors to our lazy recycling, our lazy sorting of materials, our contaminated resources. So that's why they closed the door. Other places, other buyers, global buyers, are Vietnam, Thailand, and Malaysia. They've also closed their doors because there's just too much content. Everything that was going to China, all of a sudden we were like, trying to send it to Vietnam, Thailand, and Malaysia, and they were like, oh my goodness, we can't. If China can't handle your waste, we definitely can't. They tried. Only recently, Malaysia closed their doors because of too much contamination in the plastic. There was a lot of illegal dumping of contaminated water. It takes a lot of water to recycle plastics. As we said, we have to wash them and sort them and So there was a lot of illegal dumping of this contaminated water. So Malaysia had to shut down operations, of these plants and told them they just have to clean up this practice. These countries just don't have the resources to sort or separate all of these contaminated materials, and also they don't have the space. These are small island nations, and they don't have the place to put all of these unrecyclable contaminated plastics, whereas China was just like, we've got space, pile it over here. And that's just like, that's not sustainable. So that's where this has all come around. What resources are you sending to China still? Like, what are they buying? So they've really increased their acceptance standards, like beyond what we could accomplish with our plastics. Like, they are accepting some plastics, but like the contamination rate is so beyond what our capability is at this stage. Hopefully we can clean up our act. A little windy. But for now, none of our plastics are really meeting their standards. Same with cardboard. So their standards for cardboard, accepting cardboard, have increased as well. So cardboard still gets sold and shipped to China. They send about 60 packs a week to 4 different destinations. Every single shipment gets inspected by an independent auditor from an organization called CEC. It's Chinese-based, and they will just take random bales of cardboard, pull them apart, and audit it just to see the amount of contamination to make sure they want to buy from this recycling center. They also supervise the loading of containers. This is what we watched yesterday. There was a representative from CEC there, literally, pointing, looking, watching as they took their trucks and loaded up the shipping containers with these bales of cardboard. We saw them reject a bale of cardboard for having toilet paper in the bale. He rejected another bale whilst we were there for having some plastic. So these are like the supermarkets, the boxes that fruit comes in, that have the little like plastic liners that like with grooves in them that you can put the apples in or whatever. So they just like smashed that up and put it all in. And the Chinese official saw this bit of plastic and he was like, nah, send it back. So that will, hopefully another buyer, what they'll do is they'll have to take that whole bale apart, take out that plastic and put it back together, and hope that they can sell it. Unless it rains and that stuff gets contaminated with rainwater, because then it starts to degrade and then it's useless because it's just like paper pulp. It's just mush. So the weather plays a role because it's all mostly outside these facilities. They've got some undercover areas, but those are full of the plastics. Plastics that they can't sell. Okay, so yeah, also she's like, one shipping container, an entire shipping container was rejected for one lemon slice. So again, as I said, there's a 0% tolerance rate for prohibited contamination like food waste or medical waste, or chemicals. So it's a 0.5% contamination acceptance rate for things like plastics. So they could have accepted or like toilet paper. So 0.5% acceptance rates for those sorts of contamination, but the other contamination like food is prohibited. So frustrating, like to have an entire shipping container like all ready to go, and then they're like, a half of a lemon slice, and they're like, nah, we don't want any of it. So that just goes to show how sensitive they are and how sensitive this whole industry is right now, and how important it is for us to properly sort our resources and ensure that there is no contamination from food or medical waste or chemicals. A note on that, don't recycle your pizza boxes. We used to be able to recycle those. Now they don't accept food waste contamination. So chop it up, compost it, bury it in your backyard, but it's not going to be recycled, and it's going to contaminate all the other recyclable paper that you put with it. These new regulations are so strict. They don't allow any food residue. So like these pizza boxes apparently might work in Indonesia. They might accept them, but you just have no idea if your recycling center is selling to China or Indonesia. And if they are selling to China, then you've contaminated their entire cardboard shipment and potentially contaminated an entire shipping container of potentially, of paper that was going to be recycled and now won't. And grease, it leaks, it could contaminate more. So just don't do that. Err on the side of no contamination. Compost your pizza boxes, chop them up, reuse them. I don't know, just, don't put them in with recyclables if there's food all over it. What was being done with, or what was it being turned into. So where does the cardboard go? Where does the paper go? It gets downcycled into liner boxes, so like corrugated cardboard. So it's the middle layer between two layers of cardboard. It's like the squiggly bit between the corrugation in corrugated cardboard, as well as boxes like it's compressed into harder, thinner cardboard. So things like the holders that glass bottles of beer or lemonade or something, those holders, that like hard cardboard that's wrapped around it that has like label on the outside. So if you watched my story yesterday, you should see the lady peels off the print layer. So that's plastic that they put on top of the hard downcycled paper or cardboard, which means that material, that item, will never be recycled because it's mixed with plastics. Okay, who are the other global waste buyers? So as I said, Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, China, but they're not buying plastics at the moment. It's so tough. So she's just like praying. So she's currently looking at, desperately searching for buyers for the LDPE and some of these like lower grade plastics that are just harder to sell. The harder plastics are easier to recycle, like PET or PP. She's currently looking in markets in Europe for LDPE, so a lot of European countries are doing really great. A lot of them are importing recyclable materials, but then you have to factor in the carbon footprint to ship all of these over there. That's why recycling is sometimes considered not a very profitable industry, because it's cheaper to just make virgin plastics. It's cheaper to use virgin materials than it is to ship all of our, plastic bottles condensed into bales across the world, transport them to this place, and then melt them down and recycle them into a product that is not even going to be of the same quality. So frustrating. Okay. Now that China is no longer accepting our recyclables, are more resources going to landfill? Totally. So the landfill levy, so the cost for dumping stuff in the landfill, is super cheap in Western Australia, where we did this interview. So it's really easy to just put it in the ground. It's a lot of recycling centers, like the one we visited, if they had their plastics piling up, such as they do at this center we visited, they would just, they don't have the space, so they would just put it in landfill because it's cheaper than waiting, losing business, trying to sell this stuff with no buyers. Some landfill spots do capture the methane that's emitted off the tips for energy, and there's a lot of tips that do have ground lining now that previously didn't. So that's like, I don't know, it doesn't make me feel any better, but I guess that's like some improvements around landfill. What are the best materials for recycling? Like, what should we be using? Depends on the area. Again, we can't make generalization. You really need to learn about your local area and what's being recycled and who they're selling their recyclables to. It's complicated. We have to be a part of the solution. Education, knowledge is power. So we have to learn that this is different everywhere. Recycling is different everywhere. We can't make generalizations. If we do, it has to be in the opposite direction. So assume that it is not recyclable, and then don't buy it. Instead of just being like, oh yeah, this is recyclable in my hometown, it should work here. No, look it up. Cardboard and paper are best because they are natural materials, so they will eventually break down. By themselves, they are compostable, and they won't cause an impact like plastics. Cardboard and paper can be recycled 5 to 7 times before their structure breaks down, and then they can't be recycled anymore. Let's see. Aluminium is pretty good in terms of carbon footprint because you can recycle it infinitely back into cans or building products. Again, recycle, so back into cans. That's an actual recycle. Unlike plastics. Tin cans are lined with plastics, so that can interfere with the recycling They have to burn off that plastics, same with aluminium, before they melt the tin down. So just, think about the emissions, but at least it can be recycled. Plastics weren't even mentioned. Glass, okay, we'll get to that actually. Does this question vary according to district, area, and recycling facility? Totally, always different, always different, always different. If we have to use packaging, like if we're traveling and we have to buy food that comes packaged, we don't have access to farmers markets or fresh produce or bulk foods, what material is best to go for packaging? Anything mixed must be avoided. Avoid all mixed resource packaging. And as we've discussed, it sounds like everything is pretty mixed at this point, which is why recycling is downcycling, which is why recycling is broken system. It's not the solution, it's shit. Because our aluminum cans are lined with plastic, our tin cans are lined with plastic. A lot of the recycled cardboard gets lined with plastic to put the label on easily, to have like the brand recognition. But, okay, what material do we use? Cardboard is best. Tin cans are okay. Glass is not great in Western Australia, so they used to have a glass recycling center, but it closed years ago. If the glass is good, they will, still has its shape or, is a large amount of glass, they will put it on a train and send it to South Australia. But mostly it's cheaper to just buy new glass jars and bottles overseas. So even in the glass industry, it's not, sustainable to recycle. It's not cost efficient to recycle. It's not profitable. And if you think about it, most glass gets smashed in the bin, so it ends up with glass shards and it's contaminated with other small bits in the bottom of our bins, like even cigarette butts or glass clippings, along with string and paper and just crap. And separating is costly. It's cheaper to just put it into landfill. So glass is not driving the change to have more facilities here in Australia. There's just not the cost benefit for investors. Some places are using glass, like in Byron where I've lived. They use the glass for road base, and then in Exmouth they're using glass for in gardening beds for moisture wicking. But sand is plentiful in this country, especially Western Australia, so that's mostly what they use for roads because they don't need to process it. All right. Plastics, long pause. As we've discussed, she's just the markers aren't there. Avoid plastics until we actually have recycling, or until we actually have someone buying our recyclables, until we actually have someone buying plastics. Just avoid it because it's just piling up and ending up in landfill. There is no end for plastics to go right now, except for the oceans, except for the communities in Asia, in these places like Malaysia, Thailand, Philippines, Indonesia, China, these places where we're just sending our recyclables, being yeah, thanks so much for taking that, bye, and turning our backs on these communities, these people, these human beings, these towns, these places that are ending up with our trash, our recyclables, what we think are recyclables, but they're so contaminated, it's ending up as trash, and then these people have to live in our filth. Tell me about mixed resources like Tetra Paks. Tetra Paks are those the soy milk containers, almond milk containers, even coconut water comes in these they look like cardboard and then they have a plastic lid, but they're lined with plastic because they sit on a shelf for a year and they stay good, so you wonder what's actually in these products as well. But it's cardboard, looks like cardboard, but it's got this shiny exterior, which means plastic. Then it's cardboard. Then I think there's some kind of metal, aluminum lining, and then there's more cardboard to give it its shape, and then there's more plastic so that the liquid doesn't leak through. Tetra Paks, they are never recycled. No one is ripping apart these Tetra Paks and separating out the paper from the plastic, from the aluminum, from the plastic, from the paper. No one's doing that. The woman we were speaking with was just sighing and shaking her head, and she said, anything can be recycled. Anything can be recycled. But there isn't always a market for it. So what we have to ask ourselves, excuse me, what we have to ask ourselves is this, yes, this thing might have might be recyclable, but is there a market for it? Does the place I live have the facility to process it? The chasing arrows is the worst thing to be invented because it gives us false hope. It makes us think that something will be recycled. Not only, yes, it is recyclable. Yes, that's what the chasing arrow symbol means. Yes, it's recyclable. But that doesn't mean that it will be recycled. And that's the sort of mentality that we have to have. We can't just believe a green leaf on a bio cup. We can't just believe a green chasing arrows on a Tetra Pak. These symbols don't mean that it's actually going to be recycled. It's not even going to be downcycled. It's probably going to end up in landfill, like bio cups, like Tetra Paks. The stuff is ending up in landfill. It's not getting recycled. So we have to be so much more engaged in our use of these resources and product packaging. Speaking of mixed resources, talk to me about coffee cups. So she, again, scoffs and rolls her eyes. No takeaway coffee cups can be recycled. Let that sink in. People who work in cafes or think their coffee cups are getting recycled, they can't. Why? Coffee cups, for one, are always contaminated with milk and coffee, thus contaminating the rest of the load of cardboard and paper, meaning most of it ends up in the landfill. Takeaway cups, coffee cups, are lined with plastic. So again, that is contamination from another resource. They accept a certain amount of contamination from plastic, but again, if you think about how hard it is to melt the plastic off of tins, aluminum cans and tins, imagine the volume of paper to the lining of plastic. It's just so much contamination of plastic. They usually just don't accept those. They'd rather have big cardboard boxes than a bunch of tiny little plastic-lined cardboard cups that are contaminated with your soy milk. And finally, bio cups, bioplastics, these cups that tell us they are biodegradable. Yes, they are to be composted, not recycled. So again, these are products that are contaminating our recycling, our materials that could be recycled. Cardboard loves to be recycled. Like it is a great thing to recycle. That's why buy stuff packaged in cardboard, not lined with plastic, not with a little plastic window, but just cardboard or paper. That stuff loves to be recycled. But if it's lined with plastic, like your coffee cup, it's contamination. Bio cups, that's not cardboard. That's biomaterial, so it's contaminating the cardboard stream or material stream. Bio cups that are made from plastic are like a bioplastic, like starch, like corn based or another like sugar cane plastics. These are formulated to function and appear just like plastic. Therefore, they have a similar behavior in our environment. They will still take around 100 years to break down, probably even longer in a landfill, which is where they are ending up. Bioplastics contaminate the recycling, and they also contaminate our composting. So the industrial compost that most of our shires, councils, local, facilities have for us, they want to accept our green waste. They want to accept our grass clippings and our leaves. Many of them are now accepting our food scraps, which is awesome. They don't want to accept our cornstarch hard plastics. These contaminate organic industrial compost. If your district does have an industrial compost that accepts bioplastics, fucking awesome. Start up a collection for your local town because that is so rare. But you have to call and find out. If you, just err again on the side of don't use it because so many composts do not accept these bioplastics, and when they get thrown in the compost bin, it contaminates the whole effing lot of your food scraps and green waste. And again, it costs them tons in having to sort it out, and they have to end up throwing all of that into the landfill, which emits methane as it breaks down in that inhospitable environment. Okay, yeah, so some districts, as I said, will accept bioplastics in the industrial compost if they are one of these very rare areas with this sort of highly functioning industrial compost. Great, but you need to do the research and make sure that this compost will accept your bioplastics, and then you are one of the very few rare individuals that get to use bioplastics, and you can have all the smoothies you want, and you have to drive these smoothie cups, these bioplastics, to the compost yourself, because that's literally the only way it's going to make it there into dirt. And it's still going to take years and years and years, like decades. Yeah, so that is the thing about bioplastics. It's bullshit greenwashing, just like recycling is bullshit greenwashing, just like the little leaf on all the bioplastics is misleading, just like the green chasing arrows are misleading. So we really just need to use less and push for change in packaging from manufacturing. But I'll get there. Getting just all worked up. So excited about this issue, getting the word out here. Will there ever be domestic recycling? Probably not. At least not in the near future. Investors just won't go for it. It's just far more profitable to just buy cheap virgin plastics or glass overseas. So that's a bit depressing. I mean, there are some domestic programs like Red Cycle, but even Red Cycle doesn't have enough of a market for the end products to keep going. We don't know where they are selling their plastic bags to. No one is buying right now, so it's more likely that they are just stockpiling these plastics, which isn't sustainable financially for a business. Yeah, so we can't rely on recycling. We just can't rely on this system. Again, it's just like throwing away. We just throw all of our recyclables into this bin, no matter the contamination, no matter, no idea really what's recyclable or not. Fuck that. Like, you need to know what actually is being recycled or sold, which materials are being accepted. Then you can use that bin. Your landfill should be empty. That bin should have nothing in there. You don't want to be buying things that are ending up in landfill. You don't want to be buying things that cannot be recycled. We can't rely on recycling as the answer. We have to make better decisions, better purchasing decisions with less packaging. But if you do have to use packaging, again, keep it simple, keep it one resource, like just plastic, because then that plastic item, if it's clean and alone, might have a chance at being downcycled. Just paper, just cardboard, just glass. What's the solution? Like, this is so overwhelming, right? Companies and individuals need to take responsibility. There needs to be consequences for doing the wrong thing. There needs to be fines. So this is the words of the woman at the recycling center, which I agree with. There are no fines right now around waste or recycling. None. Some councils, as I mentioned earlier, will go around and expect random bins to give report cards on how you're doing. But again, is that really going to motivate mass change? We pay landfill and collection and recycling in council rates. So we pay our council to collect our landfill wheelie bins and our recycling bins, and if you're lucky, your green waste bins. Then, the council collects that money, and then they pay operators to come around and pick up the bins, but they have to, and then the bins get taken to another company, the materials recovery facility or recycling centers, and then they have to sort it. So see all the middlemen between our recyclables and it being sorted. Like, we're not even to them selling it yet. We're not even to the manufacturers who are supposed to recycle it. Like, it's just a drawn out, messy process, and so much stuff gets lost. So much stuff gets contaminated in that long process. So anyways, we pay these rates for the council to collect our stuff. We way underpay for this service. They undercharge for the service, and then the recycling centers lose a ton of money because they have to oversort super contaminated, totally wrong recyclables that all just get piled up. It used to be that they could do it for $25 a ton to process. Now it's so contaminated, you couldn't do it for $100 a ton. So she says we shouldn't be able to put whatever we want in the bin and walk away, and that's it. We need, people don't know how serious this is. Our waste is too contaminated to be accepted by foreign countries. We have nowhere to put it. This is a crisis. So her recycling plant can charge their commercial customers for disposal and sorting if contaminated, but it's not guaranteed, and it doesn't help the grand scheme. So we need stronger legislation from government and a regulatory body to enforce that legislation, because oftentimes government passes a law like, banning bags, and then no one enforces it, and the plastics companies get around it, the supermarkets get around it, so then they get all this PR for being this amazing eco-environmental leader, pioneer, and they're just still fucking it. So we need government to step up, and we need private bodies to enforce this legislation that doesn't even exist now, but we need it to exist. Okay, what changed? Why is it so contaminated? Everything is packaged now. Everything we buy is packaged. We eat differently. We eat more processed packaged food. Like, not even food. It's just like resembles food, right? Like, it's like processed bread, processed flour into bread, processed grains into cereal with so much sugar, like chips and crackers and just stuff made in plants. If you ever read Michael Pollan's Food Rules, such a legend, like eat food that come from plants, not made in a plant. Same sort of thing. We eat differently. We shop more. We're buying so much more. We're such good capitalists, just consuming. And it's all mixed resource packaging. So everything's lined with plastic these days because it's so cheap and it makes your product last longer. But that means it's all contaminated. Why is there not a recycling enforcing agent or agency? Because the industry has been left alone for so long. It's private and it's for profit, so it should be technically self-regulated. And there was profit in recycling before, when China was buying the plastics. Now, recycling was doing great for a while, but since our anonymous contact, has been working in her 14 years, it's crashed 3 times. So here's another huge crash, and they're really panicking about what to do with the plastics. Most profit for them, for this particular recycling center, is in cardboard because they work with such large volumes of it. The larger the volumes, the more profit you're likely to make, because you can fill more shipping containers and sell more to buyers. What are your thoughts on incinerating waste? She doesn't like it. There are facilities that can do this with a low environmental impact. However, burning these finite materials that should be valued eliminates them from being used ever again. So the idea of recycling isn't a perfect solution, but it's the best thing we have right now, and we need to value it and we need to use it to the best of our ability instead of just burning it all. These finite resources, like plastics, these are extracted from the earth and then poof, incinerated, gone forever. This is a desperate cleanup attempt, and it's irresponsible. It's an easy out that is very costly. They should be spending this money building these incinerating plants on setting up recycling domestically, not incinerating domestically, which is what they're currently doing. It's not a solution. It's greenwashing. Again, yes, we want to deal with this piling up waste. We want to have an answer for, these landfills that are having to accept all of these LDPE and all these like low value, low grade plastics that like don't really have anyone that's ever going to want to buy them, and they really won't be recycled into anything very useful. We need to deal with them, yes, but again, if we set up incinerators, we're not dealing with, like, that's not dry. We're just going to keep using shitty plastics. We're going to think, oh great, we can just burn it, incinerate it. But these are finite resources. Like, we don't have unlimited petroleum to make all the plastics. So, you know, once we burn it all, it's gone. If this becomes the answer, then we're not going to drive the change to truly solve this problem from the source. We'll just keep using shitty plastics and packaging, thinking we can just burn it, plowing through our finite resources and materials without solving the real issue. We need a solution that closes the loop instead of just ends it with burning it. We need to start at the beginning and change the product from the start to impact the full life cycle of these things that are ending up as our waste, thus effectively, intentionally, thoughtfully, strategically, and sustainably closing the loop. How do we help recycling? Okay, getting to the end here, guys. If you could send a message out to manufacturers about packaging, what would you say? Simplify everything. It's too complicated with mixed materials. Use one material. Stop this bullshit mixed resources packaging. Even, why is the Coca-Cola lid a different plastic, a different plastic resin, a different material to the Coca-Cola bottle? Even glass jars with metal lids, yes, at least you can smash them and then run a magnet over the top to collect the steel lid. But it's these bullshit mixed resources like the Tetra Paks and the coffee cups that have all this plastic mixed with it all that contaminates it and makes it not recyclable. If you could send a message out to government about stricter contamination or recycling regulations or bans on materials, what would you say? Manufacturers need to be held responsible for what they are creating. It all starts there. There's only so much individuals can do. There's only so much impact individuals can have. It has to start there with the manufacturers and what they put out there for sale. So this is also known as extended producer responsibility, like a lot of countries like Germany enforce this. This is a model that we should adopt, and this is the best place to start, the manufacturers and what they're putting out there. If you could send a message out to consumers of materials, what would you say? Stop buying stuff. Think about what you're doing. Take responsibility for what you're buying. It's not someone else's problem. You have to take responsibility for the waste that you create. And yes, we create a lot because we buy a lot, because we eat a lot, because all of our food is packaged and wrapped up in some sort of material. So take responsibility. It is your waste. Other people are sorting through your waste, your materials. So take responsibility for it. That's her message. If you could send a message out to citizens as participants in the recycling center, what would you say? We can make the most change through business or commercial recycling. So get it right if you're in that sort of sector or industry. If you have recycling in your office, start there. Do it right. educate your coworkers, educate people around you. Do not contaminate your recyclables. Know who's buying it. Know, have a relationship with your the recycling center that buys your resources, your materials, so that you can get it right, and expose the people who do it wrong. Like, we need to start holding each other responsible for our waste and our recyclables. And if you have access to government, if you have the time to lobby your government, ask for regulation, ask for enforcement. And then also, if you're not sure about what's recyclable, don't just guess. Do your research. Figure it out. So that's a lot, guys. Thanks so much for walking. Brain a little bit fried, maybe. Thanks so much for watching and participating. I did hear a question about what I line my bin with. I don't line my bin. It's already a bin, so it's already a container. And I don't contaminate my waste with food. Mess, I rinse out containers. I let them dry. Like, I clean containers and then I let them dry, and then I put them into the trash or recycling. And let's be honest, I have a trash jar, so I don't create any landfill. I keep all of my landfill, but I'm just speaking about, like, for you that might not want to keep a trash jar, if you're creating more landfill, if you live with a bunch of people, wherever you are at the stage of your journey, I'm proud of you and commend you and support you. So I recommend just trying not using a liner. That's going to help the people that you live with be more responsible about what they put into the bin as well, because they'll be like, whoa, where's the liner? Like, I've got this tub full of food that I want to chuck in there, and you can be like, dude, we can't just chuck a tub full of food in there. Like, you are going to contaminate, whether it's recycling, you're contaminating everything in there with your food waste, or if it's landfill, that's going to emit methane as it breaks down in landfill. So just, like, dump it out, rinse it, and then put it in there. So not having a bin liner is actually a great way to start to connect more to our waste. And I will put this interview on my blog, iPutPlastics.com, so you can take the questions that I asked this recycling center if you want to call your own recycling center, for sure. Happy to share these with you. So iPutPlastics, I'll just copy and paste. It's a little bit rough, but whatever, at least it's up there for you. And yeah, if you guys have questions for me that you want me to tackle, we're doing a meeting of the minds in Queensland in about 10 days. So we'll be tackling companies' waste issues, because it just seems like this stuff is urgent and we need to solve it. So we're putting our heads together. We've got a really great team of epic plastic warriors. If you want us to look at a waste issue for your company or your community, there's different sponsorship levels that you guys can just put, pay us to help you solve it. So definitely get in touch. You DM me or email me, mermaid@iQuitPlastics.com. Thanks for watching, guys, and hope you have a great day.